Unlike my last video on depression, I won't be making any grand assumptions about its nature. I'm just going to be speaking to an aspect of my experience with it. In that sense, it isn't really an outside perspective, but I'm kind of stretching the limits since I'm still not a medical professional, and because, hopefully, I'm the only person who feels this way. Otherwise, it would be a tragedy. So today's topic, escapism. Pushing inconvenient things out of mind. In this case, depression and its causes. I'm not referring to more traditional means such as drinking away your sorrows until your frontal lobe is dysfunctional and literally cannot process such topics. I'm talking about escapism that is more subconscious. For context, I have been gaming most of my life. I loved A Link to the Past as a kid, and up until recently I was fixated on Baldur's Gate 3. And no, I'm not into bestiality. I did a murder hobo run, which is really only possible with a party, and I played as the Dark Urge, which has the best interactions. On top of this, I'm also a huge weeb, if you couldn't tell from the whole VTuber gimmick. Being a VTuber also inherently comes with mental illness, but that's a separate subject. I snort up cookie-cutter isekais for breakfast, and the length of my manga library is shocking, to say the least. Why am I talking about this? Because when referring to escapism today, I'm going to be talking about thinking that I have more shots in life than I actually do. To be clear, there's no part of my conscious mind that thinks, damn, that date didn't go well, time to press F9 and try other dialogue options. I'm not that delusional. But in some aspects, I kind of am. Because in my day-to-day, non-depressed life, there's a bit of a feeling that things will turn out alright, even without grueling effort. A part of me that isn't in the driver's seat thinks that even if things are going very wrong, I can still turn them around. And while yes, you can make things better in your life, don't call me a doomer, they won't get there by themselves. You, as an individual, have to take the steps, obscured though they may be, in order to forge a better life. And this is where I believe my subconscious brain rot comes in. Either that or I'm absolutely lambasting the optimist inside of me, but frankly at this point I do not care. It is my honest belief that by having such control over virtual environments I spend an undue amount of time in, and by scarfing down mangas where protagonists can go backwards or forwards in time to live a New Game Plus, a part of me thinks that I can have my own New Game Plus. A life where I can take my experiences outside of the consequences I've lived to attain them, and start fresh. And God, does that sound cringe. Not the new life, but the delusion behind it. I don't mean that in the current connotation where cringe just means lame, but in Zoomer vernacular, although that also applies. I mean that I physically grimaced in admitting that. Now, I wouldn't call this an exclusively modern phenomenon, though I never claimed it was. Plato was probably making some escapist stories with shadow puppets down in the homie's goon cave. But I would argue that starting a new life is harder than it's ever been. Centuries ago, you could almost literally forge a new life for yourself by packing up shop and moving a couple dozen miles out. Today, the institutions that maintain our society are globally situated. Could you pack up shop and move to, I don't know, Argentina? Maybe. By discarding the increase in distance needed to travel, your location and identity would be known. And if you had a 25-cent debt to the Coca-Cola company, you'd find assassins on your doorstep within 24 hours. Is there more financial room to reinvent yourself in contemporary society? Certainly. I'm not insane enough to think that you're more stuck in your fiscal bracket today than if you were under a caste system, but you definitely feel less free. Don't apply that statement in places where it logically shouldn't belong. So what am I saying now that we're back from that tangent? Well, because my subconscious brain thinks that things can get better on their own, there are periods of time where I don't feel as depressed. Believe it or not, some days I even feel good. Relatively. My most frequent baseline is shockingly apathetic. But when shit hits the fan, when things get worse rather than better, go figure, the logical brain turns on. And then all of depressive hell breaks loose. The emotive roller coaster has reached a pinnacle and it's all down here from here at a rapid rate. I didn't even know I could get anxious shivers until one of those descents. Once you hit the bottom, since the logical brain is on, you understand that you have to change, that you have to take actions to better yourself. But here's the worst part. You're now at the lowest point of the depressive cycle, and taking actions, even though you understand that they have to be taken, is indescribably difficult. It's like trying to manually crush carbon into a diamond. The unprecedented need to do better is coupled with the worst time to attempt to do so, and it feeds into itself, which is a recurring theme in persistent depression. There is a silver lining though. Not really a silver lining, but there is a path out of that emotional Mariana's Trench. You know the supply and demand graph that you see in intro econ, where when the demand is maxed, the supply is bottomed out, and vice versa, and it's essentially just an X? Well, it's kind of like that. When your depression is at its peak, you're not going to be able to put any effort into yourself. As it slowly meters off and returns to a normal state, which is still depressed for many people, but not nearly as bad, you can start to put in effort. Eventually you'll return to baseline depression with the baseline of effort, which kind of sucks, and being in the spot where you're most depressed and can't take large leaps to fix it is absolutely miserable. There's not really a band-aid that you can put on in that time aside from maybe a support group? A therapist? I don't know. Suffer in silence and all that. The takeaway? It's a video about depression. The takeaway is always the same, and a more articulate and better qualified person is who you should listen to about escaping depression. I mean, what is my portfolio on giving advice on how to beat depression? Depression's got hands, and it's not even using them when kicking my ass. Plus, the video was about the cycle that my depression goes through, and what I believe causes it, in a sort of shout to the void deal. I don't think this is particularly relatable, and really I hope that it isn't, because that would be, unspeakably tragic. But what do I know? I'm not a medical professional. If you're still here, thank you. I don't mean that in a content creator to consumer kind of way. I do genuinely mean it, person to person. I don't have a therapist, and I don't really talk to my friends about depression, outside of jokes and an understanding that we all have it to some degree. So actually being able to speak about it is, refreshing. I guess that's why you should get a therapist, but nah, I'll stick to communing with the void. As with the last depression video, if you want to comment about thoughts or experiences, feel free to do so or not do so. Leave a hate comment if you think I'm shallow and stupid. Please don't. A small bit of interactivity won't offset the emotional distress I'll feel. I'm joking. Mostly. That's the point of speaking to the void. If you criticize me, I'll approach it from a business model of how to improve content rather than taking it to heart. Regardless, that was hopefully the last video I'll make about depression. Next up on the Outside Perspective series is One Piece. What a shift in tone. But these videos are as much for me as they are for potential strangers. A final thank you to the viewers, because if you watched any of my streams, you know I'm absolutely awful at ending content.